On the distant planet Virella, the air shimmered with a strange soft blue light and cities grew like glass towers surrounded by wide plains of silver grass, where the wind moved slowly and carried the scent of the ocean and distant machines hummed in the sky. Because this world had become one of the centers of the Galactic Union, and many young minds came there to study together and learn how to live in peace among species that looked nothing like one another. Among them was a small human girl named Lily who had come with her father Ethan Carter, who worked as a diplomat from Earth. She was 7 years old and had bright brown eyes and short dark hair that always fell into her face when she ran. She liked to ask questions that even teachers did not always like to answer. The aliens at the school were tall and thin and their skin shone with faint green light, and they moved with quiet grace, and believed that emotion was weakness and control was strength. Humans to them were still new and unpredictable. When Lily laughed too loudly in class one day, several of the other students stared at her in silence. Her teacher, a Virilan named Shira, reminded her that discipline was expected, but Lily only nodded and said softly that she was happy, because learning was fun. Shira did not reply, but her face darkened slightly and the class continued in silence. Ethan Carter often worried about his daughter. He knew humans were not fully accepted in the Union yet. Many species admired human creativity, but others found them reckless and emotional. He tried to teach Lily that patience was power, but children could not hide their nature. She loved to draw the alien skies with her small stylus, and she liked to bring small candies from Earth to share with her classmates, even though the rules did not allow food in class. One day a boy named Rawl from the Virilan race refused her offer, and said humans had strange habits and dirty hands. Lily frowned but said nothing. Later that day, when the class was dismissed, Rawl and 2 others followed her outside near the small water garden behind the school. They teased her for her round face and for the way she spoke. When she turned to leave, Rawl pushed her shoulder lightly, but Lily stood her ground and told him to stop. The push became harder and she fell to the ground, scraping her arm against the metal edge of the walkway. She cried out in pain, but before she could move, Shira appeared. Instead of helping her up, the teacher looked at her with cold eyes and said, "Humans should learn to control their reactions." When Lily tried to explain what happened, Shira silenced her and said that showing tears was a sign of weakness. She ordered her to stand, but Lily's arm was bleeding and she could not. The other students backed away, afraid of punishment. A passing maintenance drone recorded the scene as it happened. Shira lifted the small girl by the arm and scolded her for causing trouble. The child screamed in pain and something in her arm snapped. The teacher froze, then dropped her gently, but the damage was done. Lily lay on the ground crying softly while Shira called for medical assistance. The next hours passed in a blur. Ethan was called to the school, and when he saw his daughter's arm in a splint and her tear-streaked face, something inside him broke. He did not shout or argue, but his voice was quiet and cold when he asked to see the recording. The footage spread faster than anyone expected. Within hours, it was sent to the human embassy and then to Earth. The networks picked it up immediately. The sight of a small human child hurt and humiliated on alien soil reached billions of people in minutes. On Mars, miners stopped their drills to watch. On Luna, workers gathered in silence before the screens. Even in distant colonies where humans lived beside other races, the story spread like wildfire. At first, the Galactic Union tried to control the message, saying it was a minor accident, but the human networks had already taken control. Every major human news channel played the recording again and again. The image of Lily's small body and her broken arm became a symbol that cut through language and politics. Ethan Carter filed a protest to the Virellan Education Council demanding justice and an apology, but the council dismissed it. They said the human child had disobeyed her instructor, and the injury was unfortunate but not intentional. That was the moment when quiet turned to rage. On Earth, people began leaving flowers and notes in front of the Galactic Union offices. Soldiers off duty sent messages to one another saying they would not stand by if nothing was done. Artists painted her face on city walls. Parents held their children close and whispered that she could have been any of them. Ethan's wife back on Earth gave an interview where she said her daughter was gentle and kind, and that she only wanted to learn about the stars. In orbit above Earth, the defense fleet stood by. No orders were given, but captains and crews watched the news in silence. Among them was Captain Laura Bennett, who commanded the cruiser Aurora Dawn. She had seen many conflicts in her career and thought peace among species was worth any price. But when she saw Lily's face on the screen, something inside her heart shifted. She looked at her crew and saw the same feeling in their eyes. No one spoke, yet everyone knew what they were thinking. Humanity had endured wars and disasters, but they had always protected their own. To hurt one child was to touch the deepest nerve of the human soul. On the Galactic Network's alien commentators tried to calm the situation, saying humans were overreacting. But they did not understand what had been awakened. Across human worlds, messages appeared with one short line that spread faster than any government statement. It said simply, "You hurt our child." The words were repeated by pilots and miners and farmers alike. The phrase carried anger but also a strange unity. For the first time in years, every human from every colony spoke with one voice. Back on Varela, the school was surrounded by security forces, but human reporters had already arrived. The Varelan government asked Ethan Carter to remain silent for the sake of diplomacy, but he refused. He spoke calmly before the cameras, saying that his daughter had come to learn not to be broken. He said that pain had been given where care should have been. His words reached every corner of human space. Lily recovered slowly in the medical wing of the embassy. She often asked when she could go back to school. Her father told her to rest and that she had done nothing wrong. She smiled weakly and asked if the teacher was angry at her. Ethan could not answer. He only held her hand and said, "Humans do not hate, but they do not forget." Outside the embassy, protesters gathered, both human and alien. Some Varelans felt shame and brought gifts and apologies. Others stayed silent out of fear. But among humans, there was no division. Civilian ships volunteered to evacuate human families from Varela. Small transport vessels began forming a loose fleet near the system edge, waiting for orders that never came. The official government on Earth still spoke of peace and restraint, but the people had already made their choice. Humanity's unity had taken shape not through command, but through feeling. In homes across the solar system, parents looked at their children sleeping and thought of Lily. In crowded stations, workers turned off music and talked in low voices about justice. Even those who had never cared about politics felt something stir. Humanity had always been divided by language and culture, but the cry of a single child had erased all distance. Ethan stood at the window of the embassy one night and looked at the twin moons rising over Varela. He saw lights moving in the upper sky where patrol ships circled and wondered how many of them now carried human observers. He knew this moment would not pass quietly. Something had shifted forever. Humanity had shown kindness and patience since joining the Galactic Union, but now their patience had been wounded. And when that happened, the universe would remember it. In the deep void beyond Varela, small human ships formed a silent wall. They did not fire weapons or send threats. They only waited. They carried miners and farmers and ex-soldiers who said they were there to protect any human who needed them. They called no government permission. They simply came because that was what humans did when one of their own was hurt. On that night, the galaxy slept uneasy under the faint blue glow of Varela's twin moons. Somewhere a child dreamed of home while a million unseen eyes watched over her. Humanity had not declared war. They had only remembered who they were. Ethan Carter sat by the small window in the human embassy on Varela, looking out at the distant lights of the alien city as they flickered like stars caught in glass, and he felt a silence inside him that words could not fill, because he knew something had started that no one could stop now, and every message from Earth carried the same question, asking when justice would be done and why the Galactic Union had remained silent. The Varelan Council sent a statement of regret but not apology, saying the event was under review. But humans were not fools, and they saw it as avoidance. Across the human colonies, the image of the small girl with her broken arm and her frightened eyes had become more than a story. It had become a wound that no one could ignore. Soldiers who had served under the blue flag of Earth shared the video again and again with one phrase written under it saying, "Never again." Captain Laura Bennett watched the same message on the bridge of her ship, the Aurora Dawn, which drifted quietly above the human colony of Callisto, and she felt the same burn of anger that had spread through everyone she knew. Her crew were quiet as they read the messages from home. A young officer named Daniel Hayes turned to her and asked if they would be ordered to act, but she told him orders were not theirs to make yet. She had seen humanity's strength before in wars and peace, but she had never seen this unity, and she knew the galaxy had underestimated it. The politicians on Earth still spoke of patience and diplomacy, but people no longer listened. On Mars, the miners had armed their ships with rail cannons meant for cutting ice. On the Moon, engineers worked day and night converting cargo freighters into defense craft. On the outer colonies, merchants stopped trade with Virellan ports. The Galactic Council tried to calm the tension by sending envoys, but every message they broadcast met silence or cold words from human channels. Ethan Carter received a visit from one of the Virellan officials who offered compensation, but he refused and said his daughter's pain could not be paid for with credits. The official left without replying, and Ethan felt that the walls around him had grown higher than before. Lily rested in her room surrounded by flowers and small gifts that humans from across the planet sent to her through courier drones. She smiled when she saw them and asked her father why everyone cared so much, and he told her that when one human child cries, the whole of Earth hears it. Days passed, and the tension became a storm. In the deep void beyond the Virellan border, a formation of human civilian ships calling themselves the Guardians began patrolling trade routes to protect human transports. They carried no government insignia, but they moved with precision and discipline that spoke of old soldiers among them. The Galactic Council protested, calling it an act of aggression, but no one among humans listened. On the communication grids, a simple signal began to appear showing the words, "Humanity stands watch." Captain Bennett watched as her crew whispered it like a promise. She sent a message to the Fleet Command asking for clarity, and received nothing but silence, which meant permission, unspoken. Meanwhile, on Earth, crowds filled the squares outside the Union Assembly Building carrying lights and banners with Lily's name on them. They did not shout for war, but they demanded justice. Old veterans spoke on broadcasts saying peace without respect was not peace at all. Teachers told their students about the meaning of unity. Across the oceans, factories began to hum again as governments quietly prepared for any outcome. Humanity was not seeking revenge, they said they were protecting their own. Ethan Carter's communication screen blinked one morning, showing a message from Captain Bennett herself. She spoke politely and asked if his daughter was safe and told him that ships were standing by if evacuation was ever needed. Ethan thanked her, but said he would not run away because running would mean accepting that humans could be treated as less. Bennett understood and told him that he was not alone, and then the line went silent, but he knew she meant every word. That night he walked through the embassy halls and saw human security guards checking their weapons with quiet determination. He realized that the embassy had become more than a building. It was now a symbol of human dignity on foreign soil. The next day, the Virellan Council announced that the teacher responsible for the injury had been placed on leave pending review. They said it was a fair process, but humanity saw through it. News anchors on Earth spoke with disbelief, and human leaders in the council chambers demanded an open trial, but were met with bureaucratic delay. The Galactic Council's central chamber filled with whispers of fear. They had invited humans into their union to benefit from their technology and creativity, not expecting to awaken their protective nature. Other species watched with growing unease. The Ricari, who had once been rivals to the Virellans, sent quiet messages of support to human diplomats, saying they respected the way humans valued their young. On Virella, protests broke out near the human sector. Virellan citizens loyal to the government clashed with human workers demanding the teacher's arrest. The embassy staff worked day and night trying to prevent escalation, but incidents spread faster than they could control. A human store owner was insulted by local police, and within an hour, human patrol ships descended from orbit and forced the release of the man without firing a shot. The message was clear and simple: do not touch humans. The Galactic Council realized that humanity was not acting through governments anymore. It was acting through people connected by emotion stronger than law. Captain Bennett watched from her command seat as new fleets assembled across the solar colonies. Civilian signals mixed with military frequencies, forming something new and vast. No one had ordered it, but everyone understood what it meant. The shipyards reported that thousands of volunteers had arrived, asking to serve not for money or rank, but for family. Bennett sent a single message to all fleets saying, "We protect what is ours," and every ship replied with a single word received. Ethan Carter found himself invited to speak before the Virellan Council again, but this time he did not go as a diplomat, he went as a father. Cameras followed him as he walked through the bright crystal halls of the council building. He stood before them and said in a calm voice that his daughter's pain was not a small matter, but a reflection of how they saw humanity. He said humans would forgive but not forget, and that forgiveness must be earned. The council members shifted uneasily in their seats, and one of them asked if his people planned war. Ethan replied that humanity did not seek war, they sought justice, and that if justice was denied, they would make their own way. The speech was broadcast across the galaxy, and millions of humans watched it in silence. That night, the Galactic Council met in emergency session. They debated for hours about how to handle the situation, but no agreement came. Some wanted to sanction humanity. Others feared losing them as allies. Reports came in that human communication networks had begun spreading across the galaxy using independent satellites, forming what they called the Guardian Net. Every major hub now had human-coded relays that allowed instant response to any distress call from a human colony. The network was built in days using volunteer engineers and AI programs. It was not government-made, it was people-made. On the bridge of the Aurora Dawn, Captain Bennett received an encrypted message from a mining station on the edge of Virayan space. It said that unidentified ships were approaching and threatening human transports. She did not wait for orders. She gave the command to move. The ship's engines flared, and within hours they reached the coordinates. The unknown ships were Varellan patrol craft trying to enforce trade restrictions. When they ordered the human transports to turn back, Bennett opened a channel and told them that these ships carried civilians, and that harm to them would mean harm to all of humanity. The Virellans hesitated and then backed down without firing a shot. The standoff lasted minutes, but the message it sent lasted forever. Humanity would not be silent anymore. Across the galaxy, the story of the standoff spread. It was said that the humans had faced the Virellans without a single weapon fired and won through will alone. Ethan heard about it the next morning and smiled faintly, knowing that something unstoppable had begun. Lily slept peacefully for the first time in weeks, holding a small stuffed bear in her arms, unaware that her pain had awakened the will of an entire species. Outside the embassy, lights from orbit reflected off the night sky as hundreds of human ships drifted above like quiet guardians, watching over every heartbeat below. The galaxy looked upon them and for the first time felt what it meant when humans said they protect their own. The sun of Virella rose with pale light that touched the glass towers and shimmered on the water streets, but the peace it once promised was gone, because now human ships filled the skies, and the Galactic Union knew that something had changed forever, and every government in the stars was watching Earth to see what humanity would do next, and they saw not rage but purpose. Ethan Carter walked the halls of the human embassy and could feel that purpose in every glance and every step, because the staff moved with quiet focus and the guards watched the windows with calm eyes that spoke of duty, not anger. And he knew that the people he represented were not waiting for permission anymore. They were moving as one heart. Across human space, millions of voices shared one thought and one will, and they called it the will of humanity. Though no one had planned it and no one could control it, Captain Laura Bennett sat on the bridge of the Aurora Dawn as her crew monitored signals from across the colonies, and every report said the same thing, that more ships were joining the Guardian fleet. Some came from Mars, others from Earth, and many from faraway mining worlds, where people who had never served in any fleet volunteered to stand watch over their kind. The official government still spoke of diplomacy, but no one listened anymore because the people had already decided what justice meant. Bennett knew this was not war because there was no declaration, and no enemy fleet, only resolve and unity that no weapon could measure. She stood before her crew and told them that their purpose was simple: to protect every human life wherever it was, and no power in the galaxy could order them to do otherwise. In the Galactic Council chamber, the tension was thick. The representatives of the older races whispered among themselves, asking how humans could move so fast and build such networks without government orders. They had expected humanity to be slow and divided, but instead they found a storm of cooperation and spirit that they could not understand. One of the counselors said that humans acted as if they shared one mind, but another replied that it was not mind, it was heart. Reports came in that human colonies had begun building new stations near Virellan space, with the help of allied species who admired their courage. The council feared this would destabilize the region, but no one dared to confront humanity directly, because every attempt to pressure them had ended in silence or in failure. Ethan Carter received a message from Earth's ambassador telling him that the Galactic Council was calling an emergency session to discuss restrictions on human fleets. Ethan knew that this meant fear, not peace. He looked at his daughter Lily, sleeping peacefully, now almost healed, and he realized that her pain had become the spark that lit an entire civilization's conscience. He thought of how humans had always been divided by borders and languages, but somehow one small voice had erased those lines. He prepared his speech for the council knowing that he did not speak for governments anymore. He spoke for humanity itself. When the council gathered, the great hall of lights and crystal, filled with thousands of alien eyes watching him, Ethan walked calmly to the center of the platform wearing the simple black uniform of the Earth Diplomatic Corps. His voice was steady as he spoke. He said humanity had come to the stars to learn and to build friendships, but not to be treated as lesser beings. He said the injury of one child might seem small to great empires, but to humans it meant everything because their greatest strength had never been technology or numbers, but the bond between their hearts. He said they did not come to demand revenge but respect, and that if the council could not protect the innocent, then humanity would protect them in its own way. His words echoed across the chamber, and for a moment there was only silence. Then the Virellan delegate rose and accused humans of emotional manipulation, but others shouted back defending humanity, saying that emotion was not weakness, it was truth. For the first time in centuries, the council was divided not by power, but by morality. Outside the chamber, human ships began forming defensive rings around worlds where human families lived. The Guardian fleet now numbered in thousands. They did not act as invaders but as watchers, and every alien captain who saw them knew that those ships would not attack first, yet would not retreat if threatened. Captain Bennett stood at the command deck as new reports came in of Virellan patrols testing the human blockade. She ordered her fleet to hold position and transmit one message to all channels saying humans stand for peace, but they defend their own. The message repeated across space and was heard by every listening station in the galaxy. The Virellan ships turned away. On Earth, people gathered again in the great squares, but now their anger had turned into something deeper and calmer. They were no longer shouting for justice, they were living it. Volunteers built hospitals and schools for refugees from alien worlds who came seeking protection under human care. The image of Lily had spread even beyond human space and became a symbol among species who had suffered in silence before. They began to see humanity not as conquerors but as guardians. Ethan received letters from alien parents thanking him for showing that love could be strength. He read them with tears in his eyes because he had not sought glory, only dignity. Weeks passed and the Galactic Council struggled to maintain order. The Virellan government finally announced that the teacher responsible for the harm had been arrested and would stand trial under joint human supervision. It was a small step but an important one. Ethan watched the news with quiet relief, but he knew this was only the beginning because humanity had discovered its voice and that voice would not be silenced. Again, Captain Bennett's fleet remained stationed near the border as peacekeepers. She walked through the corridors of her ship, watching her crew working with pride. Some of them were young, barely trained, but they moved with confidence because they believed in what they stood for. They were not fighting for planets or resources, they were fighting for meaning. Bennett thought about the future and wondered if this unity would last once peace returned. But deep inside, she knew that humanity had changed forever. The moment they stood together for one child, they had become something new. In the far reaches of space, rumors spread that other species were forming their own protective networks inspired by humanity. The old powers of the Council grew uneasy, but others began to hope. The galaxy that had once seen humans as reckless now saw them as the example of what courage could mean when guided by compassion. Ethan took Lily for a walk outside the embassy once she was strong enough. They walked near the same garden where she had been hurt, but now it was quiet and filled with flowers planted by both humans and Virellans. She looked around with wide eyes and asked her father if the aliens still hated her. Ethan knelt beside her and said that some still might, but most had learned something important from her. She smiled softly and said she just wanted everyone to be friends. He told her that maybe one day they would be, because sometimes one heart could teach more than 1,000 speeches. As they returned to the embassy, he saw human flags hanging beside Virellan ones for the first time. He felt a strange calm because he understood that this was not victory through force but through endurance. Humanity had not destroyed their enemies, they had made them see. That night he sent a message to Captain Bennett thanking her for standing firm without firing a single shot. She replied that humans did not need to shout to be heard anymore because the whole galaxy was now listening. In the following days, the first interspecies peace accords were drafted with new laws protecting children of all races across Council territories. The name of the law was simple and chosen by unanimous vote. It was called Lily's Promise. When the news reached Earth, people wept and celebrated quietly under the night sky, knowing they had done something that would last beyond generations. Captain Bennett stood at the viewport of her ship, looking down at Varela as the planet turned slowly below. She thought of all that had happened and whispered that this was how humanity showed its will, not through anger, but through care. The stars outside seemed brighter, as if they understood. Humanity had entered the galaxy as strangers, but now they stood as protectors, not by power, but by heart. Ethan watched his daughter sleep again, safe and smiling, and he knew the galaxy had changed because of her. He whispered that the world was safer now, not because of fear, but because of love, and somewhere beyond the edge of sight, millions of human ships kept watch, not for conquest, but for peace, holding the quiet strength of a species that would never again allow one of their children to be hurt without answer. The trial began on the Virayan homeworld, under the sharp white lights of the council hall, and every screen across the galaxy showed it, because the Galactic Union wanted to prove that justice still meant something, and yet everyone watching knew that this was not only a trial of one teacher, but of an entire system that had failed to understand humanity. And Ethan Carter sat in the chamber with his daughter Lily beside him, her small hand gripping his tightly as the accused instructor stood on the opposite side, silent and cold. The hall was filled with thousands of observers, both human and alien, and outside millions more watched the broadcast in their homes, ships, and colonies. The prosecutor, a Viralan advocate, read the charges with slow precision, saying that the instructor had acted without proper restraint and had caused injury to a minor from an allied species, and for the first time in Viralan history, the council allowed a human to testify before them in open court. Ethan stood when his name was called, and his voice was calm, but steady as he described the events, not as a diplomat, but as a father. He told them that the wound his daughter suffered was not only on her arm, but on the heart of every parent who had ever loved their child. He said that humans came to the stars in trust and curiosity, but that trust had been betrayed when those who should have protected turned instead to cruelty. As he spoke, the hall remained silent, and many of the aliens who once believed humans were too emotional now felt that emotion as something powerful and right. When he finished, he turned to the council and said that humans did not seek vengeance but respect, and that respect could only exist when justice was real. Then he sat down beside Lily, who looked up at him and smiled softly, unaware that her father's words were echoing across the galaxy. Captain. Laura Bennett watched the broadcast from the bridge of the Aurora Dawn, and her crew stood behind her in silence, because they all knew what this moment meant. Around them, the human fleet still guarded the borders, but not a single weapon had been fired in weeks, because now the war was one of words and principles. The Galactic Council had realized they could not ignore humanity's will, and they had called this trial as a sign of peace, but everyone knew that if justice failed, the fleets would move. Again, not out of anger, but out of duty. Bennett knew her ship could destroy a Viralan cruiser in seconds, but she also knew that the greatest power humanity had shown was restraint. The whole galaxy had seen that humans could hold their fury like a blade, sheathed but sharp. Outside the council hall, crowds filled the streets holding banners written in many languages saying, "Protect the children." Some were human, but many were alien, because the story of Lily had reached them too, and they saw in her the symbol of something they had lost long ago: compassion. The Viralan guards kept order, but even they looked uneasy, as they saw families of different species standing side by side. The unity frightened the leaders because they had built their world on control and fear, but now they saw something else growing, something stronger. When the verdict was finally read, the hall held its breath. The teacher was found guilty of abuse of authority and violation of interspecies conduct laws. The sentence was 10 years of service in rehabilitation programs under human supervision. It was not harsh compared to human standards, but it was the first time a non-human had been judged under human moral review. Ethan felt a quiet relief wash over him, and Lily squeezed his hand. Around the galaxy, humanity breathed again because justice had spoken. Yet what followed was not celebration but reflection. Humans everywhere felt proud but also changed because they understood the weight of their new role. They were no longer the newcomers. They had become the moral compass of the stars. In the days that followed, Ethan remained on Varela to assist with new policy reforms. The Viralan government asked for his help in creating an interspecies education program to prevent such harm from ever happening again. He accepted, not for pride but for peace. Lily returned to her studies, but this time the school was different. Her classmates greeted her with kindness, and even the new teachers bowed slightly as she entered the room. She laughed again, and her laughter no longer drew silence but smiles. The embassy staff watched her with affection, knowing she had done more for humanity than any army ever could. Captain Bennett visited Varela for the first time after the trial. Her ship landed near the human district and thousands came to greet her. She met Ethan in person, and they spoke quietly about what had been achieved. She told him that the fleets would remain on watch not as a threat, but as guardians, and that this was humanity's promise to every innocent life in the galaxy. Ethan thanked her and said that she and her crew had held back the storm when others might have unleashed it. She replied that humans had learned long ago that true strength is not in striking, but in standing. Across the Galactic Union, new policies spread like light. The Lily's Promise Law was ratified by over 50 species, mandating protection for children of all races and recognition of emotional dignity as a universal right. It was a concept alien to many civilizations, but one they now embraced because humanity had shown them its power. For the first time in history, the Galactic Council observed a moment of silence in honor of a human child. The image of Lily smiling became a symbol of hope used in art and education across the stars. Yet peace remained fragile. Some of the older species in the Council saw humanity's rise as a threat. Secret meetings were held in the shadows where they whispered that humans were too powerful, too united, and that they must be contained before they reshaped the order of the galaxy. But even among them, doubt grew because every attempt to harm humanity now met resistance from others who had been inspired by them. Small nations once ignored by the great empires now found courage to speak and demand fair treatment. Humanity's will had become like a seed planted in the hearts of many. On Earth, the sky lit with celebration as ships returned home. Families gathered to honor those who had served in the Guardian fleets. Captain Bennett received messages of thanks from colonies she had never visited. She read them alone in her cabin, smiling quietly because she knew that what they had achieved would be remembered long after they were gone. She thought of Lily often and kept a small drawing the girl had made for her, showing a ship flying over a blue planet with the words, "Thank you," written beneath. It reminded her why she had joined the fleet in the first place, to protect not power, but life. Ethan and Lily prepared to leave Varela after months of service. Before departure, the Viralan Prime Minister visited them personally to express gratitude. He said that humanity had reminded their people of empathy and that their civilization would never forget it. Ethan accepted the gesture with grace and replied that understanding begins when we stop fearing what we feel. Lily offered the minister a flower she had grown herself, and he accepted it with trembling hands. It was a small act, but it carried more weight than any treaty. As their ship rose into the sky, Ethan looked down at the planet that had once been a place of pain, but was now the beginning of peace. He thought of all the lives that had changed because of one child's tears, and he knew humanity would never be the same again. They had discovered their voice and their purpose, and the galaxy now moved to its rhythm. On the flight home, Lily slept beside him, her hand holding his as the stars passed outside the window, like gentle waves of light. He whispered to her that she had done something no army could ever do. She had made the universe kinder. Captain Bennett watched their ship pass her fleet's formation and saluted silently. Her crew followed her gesture, and the image was broadcast across human space. It was a moment of quiet respect between those who fought with weapons and those who fought with hearts. The stars above seemed closer than before, as if they too understood what humanity had become. In that peace, humanity stood not as conquerors, but as protectors. The galaxy had learned that when a human child cries, the whole species listens, and when they act, they do not act for revenge, but for justice. The council members who once doubted them now sent envoys seeking alliances and friendship. The Virelans rebuilt their schools and taught their children that compassion was not weakness, but the highest strength. And so the story of one small girl continued to live in every corner of space, carried by the whisper that spread from world to world, saying humanity remembers. The stars above Varela glowed softly that night as the Guardian fleet drifted in silence, their lights blinking like watchful eyes across the void. Humanity had proven its will not by destruction, but by unity and patience, and in that quiet strength the galaxy found its new balance. Ethan sat beside his daughter as she dreamed of faraway worlds, and he smiled. knowing that the future she would grow into was brighter because of what humanity had chosen to be. And somewhere far beyond even the oldest stars, the universe itself seemed to whisper back an answer, that it had seen their will, and it would never forget. Years passed after the trial, and the memory of the event slowly changed, from a wound into a lesson that guided the whole galaxy, because humanity had shown that strength was not only in weapons but in compassion, and even the oldest civilizations began to understand that truth. Lily Carter had grown older and taller, and her once small hands now built models of ships that she dreamed would one day fly to worlds even the Council had never mapped. Her father, Ethan, still worked in the Interstellar Relations Office, but he was no longer just an observer. He had become an advisor whose words carried weight in the halls of the Galactic Union. He had not asked for power, but it had found him, because people trusted him and because humanity had proven that it stood for something larger than itself. Captain Laura Bennett had become Admiral Bennett, and she led the Guardian fleet, not with fear but with quiet strength, and she made sure every ship in her command understood the lesson that had shaped their time. Restraint was not weakness, it was purpose. Under her command, the human fleets did not conquer but protected trade routes, colonies, and vulnerable systems from raiders and pirates who had begun to fear the sight of a human insignia on the hull. The name of humanity had become something like a promise among travelers, a sign that help would come when all else failed. The galaxy had never seen such unity before, and while some species still whispered that humans were too emotional, too unpredictable, even they could not deny the peace that followed their rise. One morning on the orbital station, Harmony Prime, Ethan received a message from the Virellan homeworld asking him and Lily to attend a ceremony. It had been 10 years since the incident, and the Virellan government was unveiling a new memorial in honor of the day justice had been served. Ethan hesitated at first because he did not want his daughter's life to be remembered for pain, but when he showed her the invitation, she smiled and said that she wanted to go, because the past should not be forgotten if it teaches others to be better. So they traveled together aboard the same ship that had once carried them away from Virella, and this time when they arrived there were no protests, no soldiers, no fear, only open arms. The city of Rillan had changed beyond recognition, its skyline, now decorated with gardens and open parks filled with children of every race playing side by side. The memorial stood in the center, a tall crystal pillar surrounded by smaller stones, each one marked with the symbol of a species that had signed the Lily's Promise Accord. At the top of the pillar, a single light glowed softly, never fading, powered by a small human reactor gifted freely to the Virellans. When the ceremony began, Ethan stood quietly while Lily, now 17, walked to the podium. Her voice was calm and warm, and she spoke not as a victim but as a voice of peace. She told them that forgiveness does not erase the past, but it makes the future possible. She said that humanity had learned to hold its anger and turn it into hope, and that if even one child anywhere in the galaxy could grow without fear, then everything that had happened would have been worth it. Her words echoed across the plaza, and for the first time in history, the crowd was not only Virellan but filled with dozens of other races who clapped together as one. Admiral Bennett watched the broadcast from the fleet headquarters in orbit, and she felt a strange peace settle over her. She remembered the days of tension when war seemed inevitable, and she thought of how far they had come. The Council had changed too. Many of the old members who had feared humanity had stepped down, and a new generation had risen, one that worked with humans as equals, not subjects. The Council Hall now displayed a simple phrase above its doors, written in English and translated into every language: "We stand for life." That phrase had been proposed by Ethan himself during the Reconstruction period, and now it served as the foundation of every law the Council passed. But not everything was calm. In the dark corners of space, some groups still hated what humanity represented. One of them, a group of exiled commanders from the old Virellan military, began to gather ships again, calling themselves the Purity Circle. They believed the Council had been corrupted by humans, and they wanted to reclaim what they thought was lost order. Their leader, an alien named Wraith, swore to make the galaxy fear humanity once more. When the Guardian fleet received reports of strange movements along the border, Admiral Bennett knew it was only a matter of time before conflict returned. Yet this time humanity was ready. When the attack came, it was swift and brutal. A convoy of medical ships near the colony of Argon was ambushed and destroyed. The Purity Circle claimed responsibility, saying they would cleanse the stars of human influence. The news spread fast, and the galaxy held its breath because they knew what humanity could do when angered. Ethan was in the council when the first reports came in, and he could see the same question in everyone's eyes: would the humans unleash their wrath again? Admiral Bennett gathered her fleet and addressed them, saying that they would protect without hate, and that vengeance would not guide them, only justice. Her calm voice spread across every ship, and every pilot felt it steady their hearts. The battle that followed near the crimson moon of Orus became one of the most studied engagements in galactic history. The Guardian fleet moved with precision, disabling enemy ships instead of destroying them, capturing their crews and offering surrender even when fired upon. The Purity Circle had expected rage, they had expected the storm, but what they met instead was control. Humanity fought not to punish, but to defend. When the battle ended, only one human life had been lost and thousands of enemy lives were spared. The broadcasts of the surrender spread faster than any fleet ever could, and within days the rebellion collapsed, not because of power, but because they could not justify their hate anymore. When it was over, the council gathered once again, and Ethan stood before them one last time. He was older now, his hair touched with gray, but his eyes still held that quiet fire. He told them that peace is not given, it is built, and that the only true power humanity had ever wanted was the power to choose what kind of beings they would be. He thanked the council for believing that change was possible, and he thanked the other species for walking beside them. Then he stepped down and returned to his daughter, who waited for him outside. She smiled and said that he had done enough and it was time for others to continue the work. He agreed and looked at the stars beyond the glass dome above them. Admiral Bennett visited them later that year on Earth, where they lived in a small house near the ocean. She was tired from decades of service, but proud of what humanity had become. They sat together on the porch watching the waves and talking about the old days. She said that she would retire soon and that she wanted to see what peace looked like without command. Ethan told her that peace looked like his daughter laughing again. They laughed together quietly as the sun set. That night, Lily looked at the sky filled with stars and whispered that she wanted to travel again, not to escape, but to learn. Her father nodded because he knew she would go farther than he ever could. The next year, she joined the Exploration Corps, and her first mission was to the uncharted spiral on the edge of known space. As her ship left orbit, Admiral Bennett watched from her own balcony, saluting one last time as the engines flared against the night sky. Humanity had come full circle. In the years that followed, the story of the human child became legend told to young ones across many worlds. It was not a story of war or conquest, but of compassion and will. The galaxy had changed forever, and even the stars seemed brighter because of it. And when explorers found new civilizations, they carried with them the same promise that began long ago on Varela, that no child would ever be hurt again under their watch. Humanity had learned that its greatest weapon was its heart, and that its greatest victory was kindness. The universe stretched endlessly ahead, but for the first time every world within it shared one truth: humanity had come not to rule, but to remind the stars what it meant to care. And so the light of one small child continued to shine, guiding all who looked up at the sky, reminding them that when you hurt human child, you awaken humanity's will, and that will never fades, it only grows stronger with time and love and hope.